This video is about some hints and tips on how to write a critique of an article or chapter, and we're doing that because that's a learning activity or assessment task that you'll often be asked to do in the postgraduate program. You might also hear the terms critical response or critical review used in that context. So what I'm going to talk about is what that is and some tips on how to write them so that they sound right for us. So clearly the important word here is critical. What do we mean by critical? And what we mean is that we're looking for you to read and respond to a piece of literature in a way that questions the approach of the author, the audience that the piece is written for, the underpinning philosophies or methodologies, and any assumptions that the author is making to support their arguments. It also implies an expectation we have that you will form your own view of the article and find your own voice in talking about the article. So let's look at an example from a former student in our program, and we'll go through some of the things that student did to create a successful critique. So there are several parts. Firstly, there's the brief introduction of the article, where she just talks about its topic and where that topic comes from. She then goes on to give a slightly more detailed summary of the content of the article. So that's the next couple of paragraphs that you can look at there. And that really, she starts looking at what are the key arguments that the authors are making. And they're presented in summary form, but she's pulled out the important aspects of that. Here the student moves from giving a summary of the content of the article into giving her response to that content. And she has a couple of sentences just at the end of this paragraph that provide a transition point from those two sections of her piece of work. She goes on to talk about the arguments that the authors have presented by relating that to other things that she's read from the literature in that relevant area. Finally, she moves into a conclusion where she gives not only her view of whether the article met its own stated aims or not, but also the impact that it may or may not have on the reader. But it's not just the structure that sets a critique apart, and this one in particular, which is a very good example, is distinctive because of its scholarly tone. So that's the language used, the way the referencing is done, the way the citations are done, provides an indication of the student's own voice in this. So she's not just summarising what another author has said, but she's interpreting and creating her own voice in talking about that. And that's the key. That's a key point that we need to look at, and I'll look at some examples of those. The student has created this scholarly tone through her use of language and through her referencing and her style of citations. And that means that what it's done is create her voice, a distinct voice for herself, as the reader and respondent and critical respondent to this article. She's referenced other people's work carefully. It's very clear where she's drawn her ideas from, and that's a very important thing to do. She's also not just cited or given direct quotes of their work, she's added her own interpretations to that, and that tells us that she understands it well and knows how to apply it. So let's look at a couple of examples. And here's a specific example of where she's used a strong citation style, a certain citation style, to demonstrate her understanding and her ability to apply the idea in this other piece of work to what she's analysing here. So, but first what I wanted to do was look at a way that you can express a citation that doesn't do that, so that you can see what she's done that in comparison. So, a really common mistake that students make is to present a citation or a direct quote as an assertion. So, for example, we would often see something like the following in an assignment. The total lack of quality control or scholarly screening of online resources means a greater reliance on students' capacity to read this material critically and assess its reliability for themselves. Now that provides a direct quote in the voice of the cited author, Bridges, but not very much else that shows that the student actually understands or has interpreted what those words mean or related it to anything that they know or are reading. So contrast that with the way our student has used the same quote. So she says, in Back to the Future, Bridges comments on the risks of new technologies for learning and teaching and offers pause for thought when he notes that the total lack of quality control or scholarly screening of online resources means a greater reliance on students' capacity to read this material critically and to assess its reliability for themselves. And she's put in the correct referencing there. So what this tells us is in adding her interpretation of that quote, our student has shown that she not only understands what Bridges is saying, but is able to apply it as giving pause for thought. And that supports her response, her argument in responding to the arguments in the article that she's critiquing. So that's a very valuable thing for a teacher to see in a student's work, because it really demonstrates their learning and their ability to apply that learning. So I guess the final expression of our student's own voice is where she moves to a judgment about what this article has achieved. And in the second last paragraph, right at the end, she really sums up all of her analysis that she's done up to that point by commenting that the beguiling picture of Miranda struggles to stand up to such critical questioning. As a fictional student, she is a little too immersed, engaged and motivated to provide the evidence for universities to rethink the concept of the university itself. So here she is actually giving some critical evaluation of the device that the authors have used, that is a fictional student, a fictional character, that they've used to try to persuade the audience or the reader to their point of view. And she's saying that they haven't really achieved that because it's not quite an authentic construction of that fictional student. And then she goes on to write a conclusion after that that just summarises her point of view and the effectiveness of the article. So our students used a very clear structure. She's expressed herself in a scholarly way, and she's used referencing in an appropriate way and citations in an appropriate way. And that's showing us that she's not only understood the content of this article, but she's read widely and can apply those ideas to the ideas in this article in order to form her own evaluation of it. And that's evaluated in terms of not just its contribution to the discipline, but also its contribution to her own learning. She's identified the strengths and weaknesses of the author's argument, and she's weighed that up against their own, what they stated as their own aims in writing the article as well. So it's a very well-rounded piece of work.